Hello once again. Welcome back to the Contrarians. This is one of our regular episodes where we've got someone on the hot seat about a favorite album by a band that might be a contrarian choice, might be an intensely contrarian choice or a slightly contrarian choice. I think we have a slightly contrarian choice for this one. The band we're going to be talking about is Def Leppard. And just a little bit about Def Leppard. Everybody knows about Def Leppard, but this is a band that exploded on the scene with what I consider, much to Joe Elliott's chagrin, I consider to be the mean median average of a perfect new wave of British heavy metal album, even though it was on a major label, On Through the Night. But it was a really super professional album. It sounded great. You could tell this was a band going places, even though they were super young. They're from Sheffield. But big music fans and coming on the scene with kind of, I would call it pretty much the most accomplished new wave of British heavy metal album to come out in 1980. Certainly more accomplished than the Iron Maiden album, for example, maybe about on par with Killers. But On Through the Night was a big deal. They came out with High and Dry, which people love a lot as well. And it's definitely an even better album, produced by Mutt Lange. Then the big one happened, Pyromania, again produced by Mutt Lange, and Mutt Lange is now getting into his more obsessive nature, shall we say, the recording techniques. It was a lot of tooth pulling to get that record done, but it is quite innovative in its sound and is a good solid record. They came out with Hysteria next. By the way, this didn't happen at the time, but On Through the Night is platinum. High and Dry is double platinum. Pyromania went diamond. So diamond is for sales in America of over 10 million copies. Hysteria comes out in 1987. It is also diamond. I think it's 12 million copies at this point. They come out with Adrenalize. It takes a long time. Steve Clark dies. So they lose someone. Rick Allen has his accident. I think it's New Year's Eve this happened where he lost an arm. But the band does not abandon him. He comes back and he becomes this innovative drummer who drums with one arm, and then the technology all added in, and he's able to continue to do his job. But yes, Adrenalize is another hard to birth album. It takes 5 more years to put out an album. That's 1992, but it's 3 times platinum, pretty successful record. Then we're into the grunge years, and heavy metal's not that well regarded, shall we say. Slang comes out in 96. It struggles its way to gold, so it does gold at least. Euphoria is apparently a return to the Def Leppard sound, and it also goes gold. That's 1999. Later, they get infamously more, notoriously more pop and pop and pop. X or XXX, whatever you want to call it. There's a copy of that one there. There's that. I think that was the first time I interviewed them in person. There's your Adrenalize. Sorry, there's your On Through the Night. There's your High and Dry. And there's your framed up Pyromania with the Euphoria on there. Anyway, so they come out with X. Later, it's Sounds from the Sparkle Lounge, terrible title. Then they come out with Def Leppard, an even more terrible title because it's a stupid band name. So basically, none of these certify at all. They're basically by this point kind of a we love pop band, but you put them on stage and they're ferocious, they're heavy. I mean, I was quite amazed at how heavy they are live. I saw them much later on, and they were a pretty heavy band. So they're essentially this classic rock band who had a ton of success. Nobody likes any of their recent albums, but they can still tour and play all those big hits. And, depending on what you think of those big hit albums like Hysteria or Adrenalize, everything sounds pretty rockin' live. So they're a good, solid classic rock act. And of course, Joe Elliott almost has this second career as a music fan. In a way, he talks a lot about different music, and he's got side bands who they love Mott the Hoople and all this kind of stuff, right? So he's an interesting guy in that respect. He's become one of our main big rock stars who goes out and talks a lot about music, which is kind of neat to see as well. So there's your sort of survey of Def Leppard for you in a nutshell. I'm going to turn it over to Tim, and he's going to tell us his choice for greatest Def Leppard album.
Thanks, Martin. So, more than any other episode of the Contrarians, I really feel like I had to do my homework for this one, which is really odd because the album I'm defending is one of the biggest selling albums of all time. So, what I'm finding I have to defend it against is old school fans of Def Leppard who were there from the beginning or close to the beginning. So my Def Leppard story really starts. I mean, obviously, so Pyromania comes out early 1983, and it was a huge album. Obviously, we all know this. So I would have been 8 or 9 when this came out. So I was really not listening to top 40 radio at this point. So that was a little bit too far back. But I do remember, for some reason, I must have seen the video somewhere because I didn't even have much music back then, or much music didn't even exist quite then in 1983. But I remember hearing Photograph and liking it. And even though I wasn't into hard rock and metal. I mean, I was 8 years old. I didn't, I wasn't one of those kids that was right into it right away. But I always thought the song was catchy. And that's about it, really. And of course, when I really got into listening to music seriously and buying albums, the band that did it was a band that was often pitted against Def Leppard as far as popularity, as far as hard rock bands crossing over to widespread commercial success. That, of course, would be Bon Jovi when Slippery When Wet hit. So they were my favorite band, and Def Leppard were the band that usurped them for a while. So for a while, those two were neck and neck. And my choice is going to be the album that I've got right here, sort of made a collage of the singles, Hysteria. Now, I realized that a lot of longtime Def Leppard fans weren't crazy about the direction that Def Leppard went into on this album, not only with the technology, but the lessening and the aggressiveness of the guitars and the more pop focused material. However, I've never come across anyone who out and out hated the album until 1994 when I picked up this book, and infamously there's a 0 rating for Hysteria. And I won't read it. I won't embarrass Martin, but I will just, I think he sums up his review in 3 words. Hysteria sucks righteously. So, so that's when I was like, wow, there's people that really don't like this album. And as I've gotten to talk to more and more music people, a lot of people are really annoyed with the direction that Def Leppard went into. And, a lot of Joes talk about how they were never a heavy metal band, which may or may not be true, but it almost seems to be like, why do you have to mention that every single interview you do? Because they did start in the heart of the new wave of British heavy metal. They just changed. But regardless of all of that, I have gone on record many, many times as citing Hysteria as my favorite album of all time. It's definitely the album that I've listened to more than any other. I've got it memorized from front to back. Now, it took a while. It took a while to catch on. It took a while to catch on with me, and it took a while to catch on with the public at large. Because, like I said, Pyromania came out January 1983. Huge album, even in its time. I think in its initial run, it sold something like 6 million copies. So it was this runaway success. And they, between them and Mutt Lange, they fell into this almost Tom Scholz Boston pattern of just taking way, way, way too long and overthinking and working way, way too hard. New Year's Eve, 1984, Rick Allen's in a car accident and loses his left arm. And, most other bands wouldn't even think twice. Sorry, mate, get a new drummer and move on. But they didn't. And that's pretty admirable because that's unheard of. I mean, Def Leppard they've had a lot of drama surrounding the group, but they haven't had a lot of lineup changes. Very, very few for a band that's been around as long as they have. I mean, they have Pete Willis, who left, who was asked to leave between High and Dry and Pyromania, although he co-writes, I think, almost everything on Pyromania. And then, of course, Steve Clark sadly passes away early 1991. He was only 30. They get Vivian Campbell in, and that lineup's been solid ever since. There were a few, like I think they had another drummer named Frank Noon, and there was a Tony Kenning. I think they had other drummers before they got Rick Allen, but it's been a solid lineup, So Joe Elliott, Rick Savage, Rick Allen, they've been there since the first album. Bill Collin came along in 1982, 1983, and Vivian's been there since 92. So, but when Hysteria came out, August 3rd, 1987, it had been 4.5 years since Pyromania came out. That's a lifetime for music fans. That was a long, long time ago, as far as somebody my age was concerned. And so in America, in North America, in Canada as well, they put the first track out as the first single, song "Women," and had sort of a video that had like a comic book theme to it. I thought it was kind of cool, but I didn't really think much of it one way or the other. It was not successful. Only went to number 80. The rest of the world, like in the UK, the first single was "Animal." That ended up being the second North American single, late fall of 1987. For whatever reason, I hated that song. I really didn't like that song at all. I just, whatever it was, there was something different about it. I mean, a lot of people talk about them in the same vein as Bon Jovi, but the two bands do not sound alike at all to me. It's not like when you talk about Iron Maiden and Judas Priest. There's a lot of similarities there. Bon Jovi and Def Leppard do not have the same sound at all, I don't think. First of all, Bon Jovi has keyboards. I mean, Def Leppard have some keyboards in their songs. They don't have a dedicated keyboard player. It's just a different approach. But a lot of people were, comparing them. Oh, this is going to be the band that, comes back and takes over their hard rock mantle after Bon Jovi. I'm thinking, not with this song, they're not. So then they came up with the title song, which I actually liked, but still wasn't enough to convince me to get into the band. And for whatever reason, the song that did it, and the song that did it on a huge level, was "Pour Some Sugar on Me." Now, it's hard to think back to a time when that song was new, but when that video came out, the live video, not the earlier one they did in the UK, which we didn't see for a few months, it was exciting. We just wanted to be at that show. They were doing the stage, the concert in the round. They weren't the first to do it, but they were one of the first hard rock bands to do it, I think. And I was hooked. And it was a funny thing because I'd sworn up and down to anybody that listened that I hate this band. And it was sort of a case where I had to admit, you know what, I was wrong. So summer of 1988, I got into this band in a big way and picked this very cassette up at the closest Zellers. Canadian fans know where Zellers is. And I played the living crap out of this. 7 of the 12 songs on Hysteria were released as singles. 6 of them were top 40 singles in the US. And it's a greatest hits unto itself, really. And it's, they probably never put out anything else after this, and they could have just toured this forever. I'm glad they didn't do that. But so then the next single after Pour Some Sugar on Me was the ballad Love Bites, which oddly enough was never a favorite of mine. And it's their only number 1 single. And I think the reason it went to number 1, I'm not saying that I think it's a bad song. It's actually kind of dark and different. It's not your average power ballad. There's a lot in there. But I think the reason it went to number 1 was on the momentum of Pour Some Sugar on Me, which stalled at number 2. It was just that the summer of '88 was the summer of Def Leppard. They followed that up with one of my favorite songs, Armageddon It, which is just the kind of ear candy that somebody like me just can't resist. And then almost 2 years later, they released their 7th and final single, Rocket, which is kind of a fun ode to 70s glam rock in Britain. I mean, they reference T-Rex and David Bowie and Queen and Thin Lizzy and Sweet, I think, but there's a lot of references there that I didn't get at the time. I would go on to find out, oh, that's what they're talking about. Side 2, aside from the title song, Side 2 are kind of the darker horses of the album, including 2 of my favorites from the album, Gods of War and Run Riot, 2 more songs that I just really, really like. Gods of War was their entry into the whole let's not have nuclear war sweepstakes, which just about every rock band was doing in the 80s. I mean, you had like Iron Maiden with 2 Minutes to Midnight. You had Rush with pretty much the entire Grace Under Pressure album. Metallica, the first song, Fight Fire with Fire. A lot of bands were writing, Queen, Hammer to Fall. A lot of bands were writing about nuclear war. That was their sweepstakes. Get sound bites from Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. Now, what we're gonna find is that the things that people don't like about Hysteria are the things that I like and don't mind about it. And there's 2 things in particular. One is the overall production. Now, in 1988, I didn't realize, I guess, that you don't sit behind a drum set and start playing the drums it doesn't sound like Rick Allen's drums. There's an awful lot of processing going on. There's a lot of guitar tracks. There's a ton of vocal tracks, but it all came together for me. And I remember putting headphones on and listening to this, and it was like going on an adventure. Like there was so much swirling and flangey things going on, and I just bought right into it. And the other thing a lot of people don't like about this album are the lyrics. Well, these guys are not, it's not poetry, but I think in context of the songs, for the most part, it sings really, really well. Doesn't always have to make a lot of sense. And like I said, for all the same reasons a lot of people don't like this album, I'm one of those people. I didn't start out as a headbanger. Like I wasn't in on the whole new wave of British heavy metal thing. I certainly went back, when this album came out, got the first 3 albums, loved them all. High and Dry might be my second favorite. I just love High and Dry to death. But Hysteria will always be my favorite. I've listened to it 3 times over this weekend just to make sure that it's still the same. And I'm still finding myself inside. I'm mouthing along with all the words, and I know all the guitar fills. And so, it's my favorite. It's my favorite album of all time. It's definitely my favorite Def Leppard album. And it comes under a lot of criticism, but I'm braced for it. So, Martin, tell me why I could be wrong about defending this huge selling album.
All right. I'll just mention my own opinion to start with. I mean, who cares what I think, because I've got better stuff to say. But I mean, I played it again to make sure I still thought it was a 0, and I hated it even worse than I hated it before. I mean, Joe's voice, I just don't like his voice anymore at this point. I hate the Bryan Adams-ness of it all, the Canadian-ness of it all. Just in general, the sort of safe CanCon feel of it all. And yeah, the drums I don't like. I don't like the disco. I don't like the funk. I don't know what a shoot shotgun is. All of this, right? I don't know what an Armageddon it is. I just find the whole thing ridiculous. I don't like the little muted guitar picking things. And I don't like the self-importance of it. It just seems like they think they're really important somehow. And that gets worse. It gets amplified as they decide we're pop people. We're going to try to appeal to the entire world. We want to be larger than rock, right? Kind of thing, right? And that didn't work for them. I'm kind of glad it didn't. But so anyways, okay, so that's enough of my rant. We did talk to our Marco took a little bit of a poll of our Patreon subscribers for Contrarians, and the poll came out, and I've got some comments as well. The poll came out that people thought High and Dry was their best album, followed by Pyromania. Then Hysteria got some votes, and then it was On Through the Night, and nothing else got any votes. It must kind of suck being a band where people, are basically debating whether your second or third album way back 40 years ago are your best albums. You never made anything good again, kind of thing. And that's kind of, I know a lot of people quite like Adrenalize as well. And obviously, yeah, a lot of people like Hysteria. But that's sort of how it pans out. And, I guess the oldest, crustiest of us old metalheads, there might be a few that will go all the way back to On Through the Night, but there's many, many, many fans who think High and Dry is their best album, and I would probably say that myself. Although I've gained more of a soft spot for Pyromania over time, and it was exciting when it came out at the time. But it's got some really good heavy songs on it, and I have no problem with Foolin', and I love Stage Fright and Die Hard the Hunter and Rock Till You Drop. And, I'm not a big Action, Not Words or Photograph guy, but I mean, Rock of Ages, I think, is a pretty good song. And Rock of Ages is kind of the template for what you get on Hysteria, I think, more than anything on that record. But still, I just like the chord changes. And I never like the chord changes ever again in Def Leppard, kind of thing. But anyways, Brett Peters, one of our Patreon subscribers, says, I always found it interesting how their most popular album, at least in terms of critical success is probably one of their most disliked. Hard to keep track of how many times I've heard Def Leppard stopped being good after Pyromania. Andee Blacksugar says it's really close for me between High and Dry and Pyromania, but I give the latter album the slight edge because its production values make it pretty much unique for a metal album in its time, and the tunes are all killer. Absolutely. So this is when, this is the other thing about the production of Hysteria. People say it just goes way overboard and it just becomes kind of milk toast or milky or just kind of weak and kind of all over the place. The way I've described Bon Jovi productions or Aerosmith starting with essentially get a grip, right? Get a grip. That's the name of it. Yeah, right after Pump, right? So there and Nine Lives and moving forward. I describe that as car sick production. It just feels like you're reading a book in the back of the car and you get that little kind of nausea going. And that's the way I feel when I hear Hysteria. But Pyromania, again, we were all very excited about that sound, and we kind of thought, this is kind of cool what they're doing here. And these vocals are kind of cool, big and all that kind of stuff. Reed Little says, I've never understood the overwhelming love for High and Dry. It's a good hard rock album, but it has no special identity or character. It's just a good hard rock album. If you had, say David Coverdale on vocals instead of Joe Elliott, it would work just as well. Pyromania, on the other hand, is absolutely unique and stands way out from the rest of the MTV era hard rock metal bands. Joe Beck says High and Dry is in my top 10 favorite albums of all time, possibly my top 5. It is perfect. John Clauser says, High and Dry all the way. Love the guitar work. The band sounds hungry. I love that too about it. It does sound like a hungry band. It has amazing songs, I think. And this whole thing about Mutt Lange, it's quite fascinating because the same thing happens with AC/DC. AC/DC loved working with Mutt Lange on Back in Black, not so much on the next one, because Mutt Lange was starting to go down the rabbit hole of spending way too much time and obsessing over everything. And that's exactly what you get here between High and Dry and Pyromania, and then it gets even worse. High and Dry to Pyromania to Hysteria. You get to see that trajectory even more. With AC/DC, they ran off. They left him. They did flick of the switch and there was no Mutt Lange. But so it's interesting. You get to see Mutt Lange as just a very capable, skilled engineer who still wants to make records that sound like they're made by human beings into Pyromania and into Hysteria sort of thing. Peter Jones says it's the deeper cuts from Pyromania that push it into the lead for me. True. Too Late, Die Hard the Hunter, Coming Under Fire, Billy's Got a Gun. Yeah, Pyromania is really darn good. And I almost thought, if this was me on this hot seat, I almost would have made that sea change from High and Dry to Pyromania, which I've never made before, because I think I'm still High and Dry for all these reasons. This hungry idea that John Clauser mentions, I think is really cool. But Peter goes on and says, are spectacular and much better tracks than Photograph, Foolin', and Rock of Ages. I think Foolin's a pretty cool song. And I think that album, I've said this before, this idea of the Geronimo riffs, right? From new wave of Swedish heavy metal or from Tony Iommi, I think you hear Geronimo riffs in a lot of places on Pyromania. So I like that about it. Let's see. This is still Peter Jones. In my opinion, Rick Allen is just so good here, and the production is huge. High and Dry is a very close second. Don the Chaldean writes, I know I'm supposed to say High and Dry if I want people to think I'm tough and cool, but I really liked Pyromania more. So all the debate always, forever and ever, I think, is really going to be between Pyromania and High and Dry. And just a few other things in terms of, what does the world think out there in terms of the rankings of these albums? Loudwire had Hysteria first, Pyromania second, High and Dry, Adrenalize, On Through the Night. Ultimate Classic Rock said Pyromania, Hysteria. So Hysteria is making it pretty high here. High and Dry, On Through the Night. Louder Sound had Pyromania, Hysteria, High and Dry. So again, a lot of love for Hysteria. Best Ever Albums had Hysteria, Pyromania, High and Dry, Adrenalize, On Through the Night. Ranker had Pyromania, High and Dry, Hysteria. It's funny, On Through the Night, it almost falls into, the discussion we had with Ryan Murphy about best Rush albums, with the debut being, so different. But you know, with Rush, it's way more pronounced. But On Through the Night, is really not that much of a step down from High and Dry, or High and Dry not being much of a step up from On Through the Night, right? They're both, you know, On Through the Night is a very, very accomplished professional album for a first album from a bunch of kids in 1980, right? So Rancor, Pyromania, High and Dry, Hysteria, Return of Rock, Pyromania, Hysteria, High and Dry, On Through the Night, Adrenalize. Chaos Spin had Hysteria, High and Dry, Pyromania, Adrenalize. Metal Kingdom, which is a good aggregator, actually, had Hysteria first. Then Pyromania, Adrenalize, High and Dry. Rate Your Music had High and Dry, Pyromania, Hysteria, On Through the Night, Adrenalize. So what I've learned from this exercise is actually the aggregate out there puts Hysteria a little higher than I would have thought it would have been. I would have thought always it would have come in third, but obviously it's coming in, first on a lot of these and second. And just the final note I wanted to make is, when you think of it, you nailed it when you said, this album is practically a greatest hits. And I remember, I think there were some interviews and stuff where Joe Elliott would, cocky Joe Elliott would say, we should have put out every single song as a single because they all were hits, right? This was one of those albums. This is a cool episode in itself, maybe for my podcast or something, right? Albums where almost every album was a hit, where you could have just put it over the top and put out every song as a single. I wonder if that's ever happened actually. Yet. Has it? I don't know. People have talked about it, right?
I think when you get into the more modern, like the pop stuff, like Katy Perry or maybe Lady, or maybe Taylor Swift, I think you may have some cases where every single song that radio play.
Wow, interesting. Yeah. Okay.
It's funny. I'm actually a little bit surprised too that Hysteria is ranked as high as it did, because there is an awful lot of, it's almost like normally I'm right there with, a lot of our Patreon crew, all very, very smart music people that just, wealths of knowledge. And I really enjoy doing those discussions. But in this case, it's almost like I feel like I have to speak for the common person on the street who just likes the music without really thinking too much about it, although I do think a lot about it. So to get to your point about the earlier albums, so Hysteria, I was the type of person, if I got into a band, I had to get everything. And there were only 3 previous albums. So I remember buying High and Dry not too long after Hysteria and listening to that all the time. I just love that album. Interesting, though, in that Mutt Lange doesn't figure into the songwriting. I think that's a really, really interesting point to me. And that's what makes that a bridge between the first, like if On Through the Night was followed by Pyromania, nobody would believe it was the same band. But because you had Mutt Lange control of the production and the way that the drums sound and the way that the background vocals much leads into Hysteria. Yeah. And I think Pyromania is great too, but I just find that even though I like all the songs in Pyromania, I like all the songs on High and Dry that much more, even though Photograph I probably like as a song better than any one song on High and Dry, but High and Dry just flows so well. And I listened to that album again yesterday. I still really like that album. On Through the Night's great. On Through the Night was, I bought all 4 of the albums within like 2 or 3 months. On Through the Night was the last one for me to listen to. All I'd heard off of it was Hello America, because the Hysteria video cassette had come out with all their videos on it. Okay. And what I find about that album is that Joe's voice is a lot deeper. That's one of the main differences. But right from the start, the band had great harmonies. And you're right, they're very tight, very professional. I mean, Rick Allen was what, 16 when he would have recorded that? It's amazing. Also, what you get in between Pyromania and Hysteria, I think, as far as shifting to more of a pop focus, is that even though Pete Willis had left, and I think he's only like on rhythm guitar on Pyromania, and Phil Collin came in and did the leads or did some of the leads, you still had him figuring in on the songwriting. And Pete Willis, I would say, was the metalhead of the band. I think it's pretty safe to say. And so when he was gone, you had that pop sensibility taken over, because Phil came from Girl, more of a glam approach, and they all talked about like how they were influenced by glam and by Queen. And in an interesting way, Def Leppard was sort of my gateway band to getting into Queen, because I didn't get into Queen until 92. but I know they always talked about Queen. They never hesitated to mention Queen as an influence, and I hear it in that approach to the overall production, the soundscape, the sort of all-encompassing, swirling wall of sound. Now, when Joe Elliott says we wanted to be as great as Queen, are they as great as Queen? No, but I still like this album. And another thing I want to mention about it, and this is something that you've mentioned as well, I absolutely love the cover art. I love the primary colors. I'm all about it. I used to sit and draw that logo on my school books because it'd be pretty easy. It was all these jagged letters and stuff. But I love what they did with the singles. And it's funny that you mentioned about all the singles being released. What happened here is 7 of the 12 songs were released as singles in different parts of the country at different times. I know that they were going to go for 9, so they'd make that perfect square. They were going to put out Excitable as the 8th single and Love and Affection as the 9th. And I kind of wish they would have, because that was the moment. They were never, ever going to come close to that again. And I think even they knew it. There's no way you can do that every time. You can't sell that many copies of an album. They just, for whatever reason, for that moment, they really were the band, the biggest rock band in the world in 1988.
So one other thing I wanted to mention is, the frequency, again, along this greatest hits thing, the frequency of these songs being played live. So in terms of the Def Leppard set list, obviously, this comes as no surprise that a lot of songs from Pyromania and Hysteria were played live, but I found this pretty interesting. So their most played song ever is Rock of Ages, followed by Photograph. Then it comes with Pour Some Sugar on Me, Animal, Foolin', Hysteria, Bringing on the Heartache, Armageddon It, Love Bites, and Rocket. So it's funny that the 10 most played Def Leppard songs of all time, 6 of them are from this album, which is pretty interesting. So yeah, there you go, guys. Let us know what you think in the comments. I know this has always been a raging debate, but it's interesting to hear Hysteria argued so well. Let us know if you have been swayed by this or you were always a Hysteria supporter. But yeah, let us know in the comments. Again, Tim mentioned we have had these cool Patreon panel discussions. So if you join us on Patreon there's a lot of extra content that we do that stays private. And then there's a lot that we do that we put out public and get a lot of views. So that's kind of cool as well. So I want to thank Tim again. Tim has a book coming soon that's going to be shipping eventually called Unspooled, which is all about the history of the 8-track, and it's gorgeous. In terms of the layout and the scholarship that went into it, it's unbelievable. It's super nice. Where are we in that, Tim, at the moment?
The printing process, and the company that's been doing that has been really good with sending us videos along the way. We're waiting to have one. I believe the soft covers are done. We're waiting on the hard covers. The hard covers but we're waiting on a video that we can show to the folks who pledged on Kickstarter. Okay. So keep emails, folks, if you pledge through Kickstarter for a video of just them flipping through the softcover book, just to give you a preview. And that, I just thought I'd get these out just because. So here's one instance where Martin can say he likes every Def Leppard album, ... Martin is a supporter of every Def Leppard album, ... That was released on 8-track.
Wow. That's beautiful. That is so cool to see. Right on. Okay, well, thanks again, Tim, for joining us on this episode of Contrarians. And yeah, go away and listen to some Def Leppard, guys.
That's it, dude.